Should you read the Dark Tower series? Let's talk about it. Hello, readers and writers, and welcome back to the channel. I'm so happy to have you all here, and I'm so excited to finally talk about Stephen King's magnum opus series, The Dark Tower. Now, I would just like to say I read this series over a year ago, so this will not be an in-depth, comprehensive review of all the books and the whole series. It's just going to be my overall thoughts of it and whether or not you should read it. I'm sorry, I just can't remember every single detail that happened in these books, so I just need to put that out there to start. And then also, if you guys thought that my Harry Potter review video was crazy and had some hot takes, you were about to have some crazy hot takes coming your way. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. This series is insane. If anyone doesn't know, this is Stephen King's epic fantasy western series, if you could call it that. It's so hard to describe what this is. It's definitely a fantasy, but it even has a little bit of sci-fi in there for sure. The first book starts out as a western, and that everyone knows that. And that book is down here. That's the Gunslinger. So this book is definitely a western, classic gunslinger story, and it's just a mind-blowing series. You really just can't put it into one category. It has a little bit of everything in there, and it is probably the craziest and most insane series I have ever read in my life. So if you're thinking about reading it, just understand it's not a very straightforward story, and it's not a very straightforward world. You are going to get a little bit of everything across a ton of different genres. You're even going to get a little bit of horror in there, which is what Stephen King is mainly known for, but I wouldn't consider this a horror series. Now, let's just talk about what you're going to find in terms of the overall story. First and foremost, it follows Roland Deschain as he is going across this fantastical world of Midworld on his quest to find the Dark Tower. When we first meet Roland, he is going across the desert and he is chasing down someone called the Man in Black. The classic line goes, "The Man in Black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed." It is seriously one of the most classic lines probably in literature, definitely in fantasy, and that is going to be the first line that you are going to read in this book that is really going to set everything into motion. So yeah, that pretty much does it for the overall story. That's it. That's the main hook. Roland, this awesome character, is trying to find the Dark Tower, this mythical structure that's standing kind of like at the end of time, holding all of these realities and things together. And he's trying to figure out what is going on there, and he's trying to get answers that he's been searching for a long time in relation to the tower. So yeah, the Dark Tower, when I heard that description, I was pretty much hooked. And I would say that the Dark Tower is this entire series, I should say, actually connects all of the books. So for those who didn't know, there's a Stephen King multiverse that is literally out there where all these books are connected by the Dark Tower. And when I first went into this series, I was trying to figure out more about that. And I would just like to say, if you're going into this series hoping to learn a lot about the Dark Tower and the Stephen King multiverse, forget about it. It's there, but it wasn't to the effect that I wanted. It wasn't as in-depth as I wanted. I definitely felt like I read through these books looking for the answers for the Dark Tower, just like Roland is. And I don't feel like I got enough of that. This series was pitched to me as this insane multiversal story, which it is, but it just didn't have enough of those elements in there to really satiate me and make me walk away from this series going like, yeah, wow, I got a lot of questions answered and I figured out all the big things that I really wanted to know. It's not in there, unfortunately. It will, and again, these are going to be some crazy hot takes and people are going to disagree with me, but that is the biggest thing that I went into this series for, and it just wasn't there for me. So the reason why I'm telling you this, especially at the beginning, is if you are going into that, if you're going into this series looking for those heavy multiversal elements and those answers, especially in relation to the Dark Tower, you're not really going to find them, unfortunately. There are a lot of multiverse things in this, but it doesn't get explained enough to what I really wanted. And we're going to talk about that more with the world building and everything, but I just wanted to put that out there. So in case you don't watch this entire video, at least you know, if you heard that going into this series, that's probably not the best reason to jump into this series. Now, there are a ton of other reasons to jump into the series that we will get to, but just keep that in mind. So that's my kind of overall thought of this. I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, and there are a lot of things I loved, and there are a lot of things that I disliked. So, when we're going through all these things on my piece of paper here, we're going to kind of figure out, you guys are going to slowly learn why I like certain things and why I didn't. But it's a good series, but it has a lot of weird shit. And it is not straightforward, and it is kind of all over the place. And I think a lot of people love that. Personally, I did like that, but it can definitely get a lot. It can definitely become a lot. And if you are a type of reader who doesn't really have much patience, especially in terms of slog and things like that, this series could be pretty hard for you. I think it could be pretty tough. So I would just I would keep that in mind and understand that he wrote this series over the span of like a few decades. And at one point he was strung out on all sorts of drugs, and he was drinking while he was writing this and all these things. And it really reads like that. Sometimes it reads like a coke fueled, just puking onto the page, like no structure, no idea of where it's going, and things are just happening, and it's just kind of crazy, and a lot of stuff kind of builds towards nothing. But then within that, there are some of the greatest gems that you could ever find in fantasy literature. So it's so difficult to pinpoint what exactly this series is, but I'm going to try my best. And let's go ahead and first start with, I guess I already mentioned the story. Let's see if I can add any other pieces to that. All on that quest, you're going to be going to different lands and different worlds and different places, and you're going to meet a massive cast of characters. You're going to get a good ensemble of characters, and those are, you have Roland Deschain, you have Jake Chambers, you have Eddie Dean, and then you have Susannah or Detta Holmes, Susannah Dean. It's all like multiple names for one person. Those are your main four characters. You're going to stick with them pretty much through the whole series, and it's pretty good, and it's a fun ride. And I'll say this, all the characters are very, very well written. Roland Deschain, to me, is about as good of a fantasy protagonist as you can get. If you watched one of my other videos, which is my top 5 fictional characters, which I'll put up here, you can see that Roland, in that video, I talk about it a lot. He is my top 5 favorite fictional character of all time. He is a fantastic character. So, like I said earlier, if you're going into this just for the multiversal elements and things like that, you might have a tough time with it. But if you go into it for maybe Roland's character, you're going to have a fantastic time with it. Roland is the epitome of a badass character for me. This guy has a lot of answers for a lot of different things. Like, you feel like you can trust him. You feel like he's the type of guy you would want to charge into a battle with, and he has a lot of knowledge. He has infinite stories. This guy has just been around the world 10 times over, and he's just that person that you would want to sit next to during a campfire and just have them just tell you stories. And he does that. that's really a big portion of these books, is these, like, they call them palavers, and they are these like campfire conversations. I would even go as far as to say that Wizard and Glass is almost entirely a palaver, of Roland, pretty much this book right here, reciting his history and his backstory. That's a really good reason to read this series. Roland is a fantastic character. So if you really want to dive into the psyche of kind of a broken man, especially when we first see him, this guy is broken. And his whole quest is to learn how to accept and let people in and put people before his quest for the tower. And it's a beautiful arc, and it's a beautiful journey, and this whole story is a beautiful journey. So if you want a extremely long-winded journey story that kind of goes in a bunch of different directions, and you think it's going this way, and then it just cuts back, and then it cuts to the right, and then it goes up again, and then it cuts back down. I mean, it's not a straightforward line. This quest is not a straightforward line. So understand that it is going to be all over the place. But if you do want one of those journey stories where after you finish it, you just sit back and you're just like, what did I just read? What did I just experience? Then I would highly, highly, highly recommend reading this series. The other characters, Jake Chambers, Eddie Dean, and Susannah, they're all pretty good. Eddie was maybe my favorite of the ensemble. He's really funny, and he really comes into his own, and he has an awesome, awesome arc. Jake is obviously pretty great too. Can't complain with him. He's just a kid, when we first meet him, and he goes on this insane quest. And so he's pretty great. He's just like, I would say, like a stereotypical Stephen King, like kind of kid character. And he's pretty good. And then you have Susannah, and I don't know what to really say about her character. I think if you read this, and especially if you're an easily offended person, you're going to take a lot of offense to the Susannah character. She's pretty crazy, and I personally don't feel like I have enough grounds to either defend Susannah or bash Susannah as a character. To be honest, I didn't fully understand Susannah. And I know everyone's going to be running to the comments, critiquing that, whatever else. But that was just my take on it. I felt like her character was just very weird. And maybe that's the point. But just understand, she can say some very crazy things, and people can definitely take some offense to what she says. And I think it could turn a lot of people off while reading this series. And you don't see it until the second book. So if you read The Gunslinger and you're like, hell yeah, this is awesome, reading this second book is just going to totally turn your world upside down. And we're going to talk about that more later. But she comes in the second book heavily. And it can be crazy. So just keep that in mind. I don't want to talk too much about her character because I didn't fully understand her. And it was just an odd character. It's probably the weirdest character I've ever come across. It's like 3 different characters in one, multiple different split personalities. Each personality is different, but kind of the same. But just nuts, and honestly can make you a bit uncomfortable while reading it. And if you know, but if you don't, just understand that character is going to be very, I don't know. It's a very divisive character. That's all I can say. Now, there's also the Billy Bumbler, Oi, which is like their little like animal companion. And that character, you won't believe, is actually an awesome character and has a bit of an arc in a way. But definitely goes on the journey with them, and definitely comes up in more ways than you would think. And is actually a pretty awesome character, even though it has like pretty much... I guess you can't say it doesn't have any dialogue. It can technically speak. It can repeat words back to them, like the end of of like names and stuff. So it got its name when Jake said, "Come on, boy," and it said "Oi" after that. So they kind of use that as its like running name for like the rest of the series and stuff. So it's really funny. It can't speak full words, but it definitely seems like it can understand them. And I would even argue like it can speak English like in a way. So it's an interesting animal companion for sure, but it's great. And Oi is definitely probably one of the standout characters for this series. Now, besides characters, and there are a ton of other characters, but I don't necessarily want to get too much into them because a lot of them are kind of spoilers for the for the most part. So I'll just let you guys learn the other characters as we go. But just know it's not just for characters. Unlike The Road, where it's like just the main two characters and you're just kind of meeting random people. Like this has kind of a reoccurring cast of characters that you see. You also have like the Crimson King, big villain in there, and then you have the Man in Black. And I will say something about the characters is that you never truly know what to expect with any of them. They can kind of come from tons of different places, and they can kind of be tons of different people. And there are some big twists and some big oh shit moments in there when you learn like the real identity of some of these people. So yeah, and even building on that, if you're a big Stephen King fan and you're a big fan of all the other books, I think you're gonna love this because there are Easter eggs galore. But maybe we should save that for later. But yeah, there are some crazy Easter eggs in this. So we'll talk about that in a second, but let's go ahead and jump into the world building of this, which is next on my list. And the world building in this is incredible. It is some of the deepest world building I've ever seen. It is probably one of the most intricate worlds I've ever seen in my life. I've truly never seen a story with a world this just gigantic and interconnected, and the explanations in it are mind-blowing. It sometimes feels like this story is just a giant acid trip, and it can be a kind of a psychedelic journey in a sense. Like it's just mental that he came up with some of this stuff. Like you don't understand how one human's mind can come up with this much shit. And even coming from a writer myself, I was just in awe of the world building. So if you want a crazy world that I would say you won't really find in any other fantasy book or any other piece of literature for that matter, this is it. This is a one of a kind, a one of one story. And it's fascinating and it will blow your mind. It is just mental. But that being said, it wasn't explained enough to my liking. It has so many elements and there's so much stuff kind of at work playing at the same time and intertwining together, and it doesn't give enough explanation to some of those crazy details. So I picked up this book, and this is the Dark Tower Concordance. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you read through this while you're reading it, but if I ever do another Journey to the Tower, which is what it's called, each time you read through the whole series, it's like one Journey to the Tower, I would recommend reading this for your second, Journey to the Tower, which is what I probably will plan on doing. I don't plan on reading this series again for a long, long, long time. Not because I hated it, but just because I've got so much other stuff to read, and it just wouldn't be in my best interest or in the best interest of you guys to read another series like this when I have so many others that you guys all want me to get to. So it's going to take some time. I would probably say I would read it again in another probably 5 to 10 years or something, where I've forgotten most of the story and it's all kind of fresh, and I just go through it with a fresh set of eyes and see what happens. But this will hopefully help you like on your journey, and it explains a lot of stuff, and this is the kind of thing that I think I was always looking for. So I'll have a very good time reading it again, but with this, so that all those things that I like didn't feel like were explained enough, or I didn't understand enough, this will kind of fill in some of those gaps. But it's not something that you probably want to read your first time around, because there's so much stuff in this that you won't know, that if you're constantly flipping back and forth between these, it's not only going to take you a super long time, but it's probably just going to make you even more confused. Once you get the full picture, I think it's just easier, like I said, to fill in those gaps, but you definitely don't want to be flipping back and forth. So that's kind of the only issue, is just that the world building is so deep, and I just wanted more of that craziness and more explanations for some of those things. I wanted to see more of that stuff, but it's not there. And I guess probably one of the most frustrating things about this entire series is the fact that he spends so much time on bullshit that doesn't push the story forward. You could argue it pushes the characters forward, but it doesn't get to the nitty-gritty that I was hoping for. I truly love like a deep fleshed out world that the author feels like that, like you can feel that they know where the story is going and what all the elements in the world, like what purpose they all serve. This does not feel like that. This truly feels like he threw a bunch of shit out the wall, half of it stuck, half of it gets forgotten about, and then as he's picking through this shit on the wall, he's throwing even more stuff on the wall. And it's like, can we just focus on one thing for once? Like, can you please just explain this one thing? Nope, I'm just going to run off and do another side quest or something like that. So keep that in mind. I know you guys might have thought coming to this video that I just absolutely adore this series because I've talked about it a lot, and Roland is one of my favorite characters, but this was truly one of the most frustrating series I have ever read. And I would say it's probably because of the world building. Just the fact that I just didn't feel like I could get deep enough into this world to really feel like reading all of these gigantic books. I mean, like, look how big some of these are. Reading some of these and just feeling like I just read like 1,000 pages of like single space font, and I still don't feel like I have enough answers. So that's my take on the world building. It is fantastic. It's just not explained to my liking, but other people might have differing opinions on that. But I thought that this is probably one of the most unique and craziest worlds I have ever come across in my life. So yes, if you want a crazy deep world, check this out. Enough on that. Let's move to the writing style. The writing style of this is really good in terms of like the prose. It's just classic Stephen King. I wouldn't say Stephen King is like known for his prose, but I think he's an underrated prose writer in that regard. Like, I just think that this guy has some passages in here that will just blow your mind, and the references to pop culture and the references to his other books and all these things, like, it's a very well written series. That's not a knock. This first book, The Gunslinger, has such an atmosphere and such a vibe to it that I've never truly come across in anything else. And I truly think that's because of Stephen King's prose. It really drags you in, and it's quite amazing. And if you've read a lot of different Stephen King stories, I think you're going to love this. And I would definitely recommend reading other Stephen King stories before you get into this. See if you like his writing style. I personally do like how Stephen King writes. Other people might not, but I still think that his prose is actually pretty underrated in this stuff, and it's fantastic. That being said, the writing can kind of be all over the place in terms of just how chaotic it can feel. So again, if you're looking for that straightforward story, looking for that straightforward writing, it is not in there. Now, continuing on that, let's talk about the action and the energy of the story, because as you all know, I love to talk about the action in these books. I love action, and so these books have a decent amount in them. A decent amount in them. So the action is more on the thin side than the heavy side, but there are some moments in these books that will just knock your socks off. If you are an aspiring author and you like to write anything else, I would highly recommend you read through at least the Gunslinger, and maybe Wastelands has some really good stuff. Wizard and Glass has some crazy moments, and then even like the last two books are up there. Wolves of the Calla, like the ending of that has a pretty good showdown. So if you're looking for learning how to write with energy and what that exactly means, and I have other videos up there where I talk about how to write with energy and how to write action like Stephen King. I think if you are a writer, it's going to show you how to do that. And energy to me is this principle of how are you getting the reader to move down the page? How are you getting them to flip the pages? We've all read a page-turning book. And to me, a page-turning book is filled with energy. That is what causes you to turn the pages. So these books are some of the most energized pages. It holds some of the most energized pages I have ever read in my life. Stephen King literally has the ability to make 100 pages feel like 10, where you're reading so fast, you can't put it down, you can't stop, and by the time you've read 100 pages, you just go, oh my God, I didn't even think I read that much. I thought I only just read 10 pages, but you're just flying through these. But then he also has the ability to make 10 pages feel like 100 in the worst way possible. So it's just so I don't know. It's like sometimes these books can just feel like you're flying through them, but then the slog is just unbearable. There were multiple times while I was reading this where I was not looking forward to sitting down and reading these books. Not the Gunslinger. The Gunslinger can be tough to get through, but it is, a decently thin book. So it's not going to take forever to read. But some of these others, especially Wolves of the Calla, golly, were some of the slowest, most boring, drawn out stories I have ever read. And I've read a few different books since then, right? But I haven't read anything with the slog of some of these books. I said Harry Potter had some filler in there. There's no filler or slog compared to these books. And I know I'm going to get the Dark Tower fanatics coming at me for those hot takes, but that was my personal opinion. I genuinely, I had a friend named Trey, and I would always text him, and I'd be like, dude, I am not looking forward to reading this book today. I cannot stand how this is moving at the slowest pace. And he's just like, well, why are you even reading them? I'm like, because it has the energy. Some parts of it has some of the highest highs you will ever come across in any book, but then some of the lowest lows you could ever imagine. Some of the slowest, most drawn out, slog-filled sections that you're just like, oh my God, can we get on with it? With that being said, I think it was because someone hit him with his car. I shouldn't be laughing at that, but he got hit by a car later in his life, and it almost took him out of riding. It almost killed him, actually. And there are a lot of times, I think, while he was writing this, especially like before and after the accident, where he didn't really know where it was going. I think after the accident, he was more inspired to finish it and to like just get it over with, for better or for worse, because some of these later books definitely feel rushed and like you could just tell he was done with it. But before the accident, you can definitely tell it's very fragmented. You get this feeling that he didn't really know where this was going to end up. And that's with my next point with the structure of this series. It's just all over the place. And sometimes when you feel like we're finally getting to the tower, okay, we're so close. We just went through all this bullshit and now we're finally getting to the tower again. Oh wait, we're going to go through a 600-page backstory. Oh, come on, you know? So that it just and then sometimes it's like with Wolves of the Calla, I felt like we're so close to the Dark Tower, and then all of a sudden, boom, we go to Wolves of the Calla, and now we spend 900 pages in this like small town, and it's some people's favorite book. So I'm gonna get the Wolves of the Calla fanatics coming at me now, but it was not my favorite, and we'll get to the rankings later. But there are just some times where you're just like, can we just get on with it already? Like, why are we still sitting here? Why are we still wasting time with any of this? Like, can we please just get to the Dark Tower? And it's like, nope, we're just going to take another side quest. So that is how I would describe some of the structure and some of the pacing. It's not a straightforward story. The books do not wrap up with a nice little pretty bow, and you're just like, oh, that was amazing, and what a complete fleshed out story, you know, where you're starting with the intro to the world, and we're exploring, and then we go out into the world and we're meeting new characters, we're doing this and that, and then we have a big climax and the final fight, and then all of a sudden we have a resolution where, you know, the chosen one goes back to the village and goes back to where it all started. No, you're gonna literally be reading and you're gonna finish the last page and go, is that it? Like what was that it? Like, I just read 1,000 pages. Like, that can't be it. There's just no way that was the ending of that book. But that happens more than you would expect. There are some endings to this where it's like, all right, let's head to the tower now. And then it just ends. And you're just like, whew. As you can tell, I have a lot of strong feelings about this series. And a lot of people are going to have different takes on it, but that is just how I felt. It was so frustrating. But then there are some great parts of all these books, and that's why I kept reading it. You know, I think that you might wonder, why did I even stick with this? But I think that the Gunslinger was so good at the start that I just kept going, and then by the time I got halfway through and I was enjoying some parts of it, but I was really disliking other parts of it. It's the sunken cost fallacy by that point. I had already put so much time into it, and I was like, you know what? I just have to push through and finish this thing. So that's how we got to where we are with why I finished it and why I'm sitting here making this video now. But if you are a reader who likes like a trilogy structure, beginning, middle, end, this series is not that. You can't even call the first 3 books a trilogy. You have to read all of them to get the full story. And it just doesn't, like Harry Potter, every single book wraps up perfect. And it's like every single time Harry returns back home. That it's not like that with these. I don't think I even really understood what that looked like until I read this. And it's not even that they end on cliffhangers. They just sometimes end on some of the most anticlimactic moments ever. And you're just sitting there like, what? But I wouldn't say that's like a bad thing. It's just something to keep in mind. So please, before, I get a lot of comments telling me how wrong I am about all this stuff, which I don't say I'm right with any of these things, but that when I tell you guys these things, I'm just trying to make you aware of what I felt, because when I watched Should I Read Dark Tower videos, no one really told me this stuff. Like, I really think if someone had just beat into my head and told me like there's so much slog in this book and in this series, I don't know if I would have read it. So that's it's just a risk you have to take. If you can get through that slog, then I think you'll really enjoy this. But if you're not a reader who really likes just super long books that sometimes don't really go anywhere and only have just little gems in them, then these might be a little bit tough for you. But if you are someone who just like, all right, I'm going to just sit down, I've got no plans, I got nowhere to be, and I just want a world to just dive into that I just can't stop reading, and I'm locked in a cabin and there's a storm outside and I just want to get lost in a world for a little while, then definitely I think that this is going to be for you. So I'm putting all the books out now because we're going to go through the rankings here. And again, I can't really fit all of them on the table, but like I said, that's the best way I can describe it. If you want that world to just dive into and get lost in, and you don't really care where it's going or where it's ending up, then this is going to be for you. But if, like, for me as a writer myself, and I view stories kind of more of an analytical point of view than just like for pleasure and enjoyment, this story was just very hard for me to just stay invested in because it just felt like it had no direction. So that's what I'll say about the structure and all that. And now let's finally get into the rankings. So here are all of the books laid out, and we're going to start with my least favorite book out of the entire series. And unfortunately, that is going to be, boom, Wolves of the Calla. Well, I'll show you guys the cover first. Wolves of the Calla, man, I don't know if I read it wrong. I don't know if I should go and reread it. I think that the reason why I dislike this book so much is because this was the second to last Dark Tower book, or not the second to last. I think Song of Susannah is, let's see. Yeah. Song of Susannah is the second to last one. It's the fifth book in the series, so it's not the second to last, but it is close. It's very close to the end. And I just felt by the time that I got to this book, I had already read an absolute chunker, which was Wizard and Glass right here. By the time I got to this, I just felt like I was burnt out and I needed to just get to the tower at all costs. And I was just so done with everything. I was like, okay, how can I want to figure out this multiversal stuff. I want to figure out the tower, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden you get to here and it's another gigantic book where they're just in a town and they're not moving toward the tower. It does have some standout moments. I will say that. I don't know how much I don't want to spoil too much for you guys, but if you guys want to talk spoilers, please comment them down below and let's get into some discussions, because there's a character in this that I can't really spoil. He's a standout character in this, and it does have some great moments in this book, but it just, something about Wolves of the Calla just did not work for me. And it has such a cool cover. Like, look how sick that cover is. But and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be this like crazy action book or whatever, but it just felt like, based off that cover, but it felt like it dragged forever. But somehow it's some people's favorite books. So I'm gonna have to say it's my least favorite. I read these a while ago, so I can't really get into specifics. It felt like we weren't moving towards the tower. It felt like a drag. The ending was fun, but a bit anticlimactic, and just didn't really work for me. So unfortunately for me, Wolves of the Calla is my least favorite Dark Tower book. Next, let's see what we're going to go with. Boom. Wizard and Glass. I know this is going to make some people so sad. If I were to reread Wizard and Glass, I think I would really enjoy it. I think I was burnt out with the series, and I was just sad that it's like, come on, now we're going back in time and we're doing this love story, and it works, but it definitely feels like a side quest. And it's like, yes, it definitely fleshes out Roland's character and his past love interest. Susan Delgado is her name. And it's great for that, but it also is very slow. It takes a long time to really get to the meat and potatoes. And the ending, though, of the story is awesome. But it definitely does feel like it drags on just a little bit too long. And I know a lot of people are not going to like that, but Wizard and Glass did not work for me when I read it. I thought, before I read Wolves of the Calla, it was my least favorite book of everything so far. So yeah, if I were to reread it, I think it would be really good. It just, unfortunately, didn't work for me at that moment. And then ultimately it, fell pretty low on my list compared to everything else. I just think I think all these books, besides like the first three, really could have used a good editor and someone that could have just come through and cleaned it up a little bit, shaved off 50 pages, 100 pages of each book. And I think it could have just been of some of those bigger books later. But unfortunately, it didn't work for me, guys. I'm sorry. So Wizard and Glass is up there. It's a lot of people's favorite book. If you're a fan of romance, if you're a fan of like a love story, it's really good. The ending is fantastic. I will say that. I still think about it all the time. I love seeing Roland's friends. I love seeing the people that he used to grow up with and fight, like the other gunslingers and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think that if you're a fan of like kind of a love story, backstory for Roland, you'll probably love it. I just didn't really work for me. All right, so now let's see. This is where it gets really tough. Oh man. Okay. Maybe I would say from here on out, I love all of these other books. These two were the toughest for me, but everything else really worked for me. So when I put whatever I'm about to put right here, it's not that I disliked it. It's just that I liked everything else more. So there we go. Next is The Wastelands. I love this book. I did feel like maybe there were some moments that it dragged, but it overall, this book is fantastic. So I will say this, this train on the cover is a very important aspect of this book, and it's really, really freaking cool. If you want to see some awesome energy moments in this, some energized writing scenes, it's in The Wastelands for sure. I would say maybe like the beginning, it takes a little bit to get going, but once it gets going, just like a train, it's moving. So The Wastelands is a fantastic, fantastic book. It has so much world building. It was so damn cool. I absolutely loved it. And I would maybe even put the Dark Tower. I would maybe put this above the Dark Tower and put the Dark Tower here. Now that I'm thinking about it, the Dark Tower, sorry, I should show you guys this cover. The Dark Tower is fantastic. It definitely, again, it drags, and the ending is a little bit, parts of the ending were a bit anticlimactic, but the actual ending of this book is fantastic. And there are some scenes in this that were just awesome, that I love towards the end. So, I think that either option, you could put the Dark Tower or the Wastelands. Either one here is going to work. It's so hard for me. It's so hard to rank some of these like in this later stage, because they're fantastic books and they all have great moments within them. I would say that maybe that this just drags on a little too long, the Dark Tower, but the ending, one of the greatest endings of any book I've ever read, one of the greatest series climax. I mean, it's fantastic. And I would say it's probably the only reason why I even think of this series still so highly, because I love the ending. But funnily enough, not a lot of people do love the ending. So who knows? I definitely have differing opinions than a lot of people, but I just thought the ending was exactly what it needed to be. It's all that it really could have been. It was perfect. It made me want to reread the entire series immediately again, try and pick up on some little details and some little Easter eggs and things like that. This book has some cool Easter eggs, by the way, especially if you're a fan of It and things like that. Like the Dark Tower has some cool stuff in there, relating and connecting to things like that. And it's just the beginning, I think, was just a bit. It was like, come on, all right, I'm ready to get to the end here. But the ending definitely made up for it. But I would say the Wastelands is probably a stronger book all the way through. So that's why I'm going to flip my ranking there. I'm going to put the Wastelands above the Dark Tower, just because it is that stronger book, and I probably enjoyed more of it than I did the Dark Tower, whereas I really only enjoyed the Dark Tower at the end. Next, we're going to go with Song of Susannah. The only reason why I put this above Wastelands is because this was the first book where I finally felt like he really tapped into the multiversal elements that I was craving. So we finally got all that shit that I wanted. It was mind-blowing, some of the craziest things you will ever see in literature, and it goes to some crazy places. Now, I think I watched a Daniel Green video one time talking about the Dark Tower, and he mentioned that Stephen King is a character in his own series, and that is true, and that is the case for this book, The Song of Susannah, because it has a lot of that in there. A lot of that crazy multiversal stuff, and yes, we see Cy King in this book, and it is fantastic. A lot of people have problems with it though. So let me know if you didn't like this. Let me know your own ranking down below. But I love the multiverse in this. It's so wacky, and it was just so crazy, and I never expected to see that. But it's in there, and this book has a lot of it, so we're going to put that there. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about The Drawing of the Three. This book is my second favorite of the whole series, because this is probably, besides the Gunslinger, this is what got me super invested. And I would literally say, if you do journey into this series, read the Gunslinger first and foremost, and do not stop. If you like the Gunslinger, or if you don't like the Gunslinger, you have to at least read this next. This book is way more in line tonally with what the series actually is than the Gunslinger. I think the Gunslinger, and I think this is a fact, was originally a collection of short stories or a novella or something else that he wrote when he was really young. So when you look at it from that angle, it feels like the Gunslinger was more of its own thing. It was supposed to be its own story to start. And then he went back and retconned things and connected things and made things, work within the Dark Tower frame. So it definitely doesn't really feel like the Gunslinger knows what it wants to be or the connections to the Dark Tower or anything like that. Whereas this definitely is like, okay, this is a Stephen King Dark Tower book. This is what you really want if you're looking for just madness in words. This has some of the most mind-blowing writing and events and anything else that you could just ever imagine in your life. I can't even begin to explain how crazy this book is. It's mental. It definitely feels like he was just coked out of his mind writing this, and it's mental. There are some of the most like psychedelic things like you could just ever imagine seeing in a book. Some of the stuff that you're just like, how did this guy ever even conceive something like this? Like, who thinks of something like that? So if you just want a wacky, crazy, out of control, mind-bending, mind-blowing book, Drawing of the Three is up there. I'll probably reread this just on its own one day because it's just so crazy. Yeah, it's good. It's really good stuff, and it has some of those crazy scenes in it. So definitely check that out. That's number 2 for me. And last but not least, if you haven't guessed it so far, we have the Gunslinger. Now, I'm a massive fan of Westerns. I'm a massive fan of fantasy, as you guys can tell. I'm a massive fan of gunslingers, cowboys, bounty hunters, things like that. Anyone who wears a cowboy hat. I like that stuff. So this was like the perfect novel for me. I was like, okay, this is awesome. Now, it is confusing. It is a very, very confusing book. And you definitely have to read more to really understand half the shit that it's talking about. I definitely want to go back and reread this, like, no matter what, because I think that this book, let me hope all of it's in frame. There we go. I would love to just go back and read The Gunslinger on its own and not even continue with the rest of the series, except, cherry picking some of the things that I want out of this. But The Gunslinger is up there. It's just, man, it's just good. It's got to be one of my top 5 favorite books ever. That will be a video that will come probably around Christmas time. But it just, I don't know how to describe it. The Gunslinger is, it has a lot of walking and introspection and just, the gunslinger, like Roland being on his own. And I think that is probably what I like the most about it, is it's just kind of this weathered cowboy going across the desert, and he has no one, but he has all these memories. And the whole point is like the world has moved on at this point. And what that means is technology has started to not work anymore. People are sick. Lots of people have died. There have been wars. You can't grow anything. It's just a wasteland. And this has such a cool atmosphere while you're reading it, where you really feel like you're in the desert and you're wandering around this dusty, old, forgotten world. And unfortunately, it doesn't, like the rest of the series doesn't give me the vibe that The Gunslinger did, And it made me sad because I was still chasing the feeling that this book gave me. But it's like, if you want a pure Roland story, this is it. Now, you do run into another of the main characters in this, but of course, it's mostly just Roland kind of until like, maybe midway through or something. And it has one of the, again, most mind-blowing revelations and most mind-blowing chapters I've ever read. The ending of this book is fantastic. If you like existential questions and thought-provoking conversations and just explanations for the world and the universe and things that just make you sit back and just go, what? Like, what did I just read? Like, I've never even thought that deep before in my life. There's a palaver at the end of this that has all of that in there. And it's fantastic. That ending genuinely is one of the coolest endings I've ever come across, and it absolutely hooked me and made me read it. And honestly, I would say that ending alone, to see that King could write in that way, is probably the biggest reason why I stuck with this series over anything else, because I could see what a master this guy was, and I could see how skilled he was in what he does, and it clicked for me, and it made me go, if there is more of that ending in these books, I'm done. We can pack it up, ladies and gentlemen. We can pack this motherfucker up, because I will walk away with this being my favorite series of all time. Now, of course, it didn't quite do that for me, but it gave me that feeling that, like, if the rest of this is anywhere near this, then I'm going to talk about this series for the rest of my life, which, I still do. I mention it to a lot of people. I've recommended it to a lot of people, and it is, it's definitely up there for something I love, and, one of the best series I've ever read, but at the same time, it didn't quite capture, the rest of the series didn't quite capture the things I loved about the Gunslinger and even the Dark Tower as a whole. And it didn't, I'm sorry guys, it ultimately didn't quite work for me, but it still is up there for, some of the best stuff I've read. But the Gunslinger, for sure, one of the best books I've ever read, and that is why it is easily number one for me. I love rolling in that story. I love the world. I love the world building, character development, and I love the palaver at the end. Again, if you know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about it in the comments if you want to get into that discussion, because it's fantastic. So that should pretty much do it for my ranking. I have not read The Wind Through the Keyhole because I couldn't do it. I could not. I finished these and I was like, I have to put these on the shelf for years. And that is why I'm finally I was even contemplating if I should talk about this series, because I didn't know what I should say. And I even felt like I still needed more time to really let it sit and marinate, but I didn't want to forget too much about it to still be able to talk about it. So Wind Through the Keyhole is kind of like a tie-in book. It's like an interlude almost, and I think it happens but before Song of Susannah, something like that, or before the Dark Tower, one of those two, and it's not essential to the main story, if that's what you're wondering. Some people would argue you should read this, but it's not needed. It's just kind of another side story. It's set in the Dark Tower universe. It follows the main characters, but it doesn't have any implications on the main story. It might have more character development and just maybe fleshes some things out, but you don't miss anything by not reading this. A lot of people recommend reading the whole series and then reading this after, and it's kind of it's like a sweet memory almost, and you're you kind of reminisce about this group and their journey and all that stuff. And I just couldn't do it at the time that I read it, because it just wasn't in the cards for me. I was so burnt out. I needed to read something else, and I just couldn't do it. So that's my explanation. If you're loving the series, definitely read The Wind Through the Keyhole, but it just couldn't do it for me. So that does it for the ranking. And finally, to answer the grand question that we have here, which is, should you read it? I don't know. I'm just kidding. I would say, first and foremost, you have to read another Stephen King book, maybe a few. And if you are a Stephen King fanatic and you love his writing and you know what he's about, you know what to expect, give this a try. If you've never read any Stephen King, which I hadn't really read any Stephen King before I finally read this, and truth be told, I hadn't really read a whole lot of fantasy either, or even books this big before. I've never read, these are goddamn door stoppers. Look at these things. And they're single space too. The font is, and they're just dense books. So I had never read something like that before in my life. And I truly think it was just a bit too overwhelming for me. I think now I think I could go back and have a whole different view of it, because that's kind of what's been happening. I just like, for me, just reading through a lot of different stuff these days. Even if I probably went and reread Dune again, like I probably feel like I would have a whole different view of it again. But some books just impact you certain ways when you read them, and and this was just one of those that I think it was too overwhelming for me. But if you have a lot of reading experience, if you've read a lot of crazy books, and if you know Stephen King as a writer, either you know what to expect or you've read his books before, definitely read this series. If you have never read Stephen King before, if you're new to reading and you're looking for a straightforward, easy, fun series, do not read this series. Please take my word for it. You might not listen and go and read it, and you might have a blast. And if you do, I would be so happy for you. I never want to discourage anyone from making their own opinions about anything. I'm answering should you or should you not, but these are only recommendations based on my personal beliefs. Literally, go and read that series if that's what you want to do. But I assume because you're watching even to the end of this video, you're trying to decide if you should and if you want to know my opinions. So, go do it. If you just want to say fuck it, I won't stop you. I won't tell you not to. But I would highly recommend that you don't read it if you fit that category. If you are someone who just doesn't have a lot of experience yet with literature and things like that. And if you're not a fan of Stephen King, especially if you're not a fan of Stephen King, this is the most, and I know this is just going to sound like repetitive or obvious, this is the most Stephen King series you could ever imagine. These are the most Stephen King books you could ever imagine. You might think It or The Shining or Salem's Lot are the most Stephen King books ever. Those are like a walk in the park compared to these in terms of how out there and outlandish some of that shit is. I mean, if you know like those crazy scenes in It and whatnot, like kind of towards the end, everyone knows them. If you know those scenes, picture like multiple of those in these books, and just really just weird shit, and just kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, what are we doing here? That's how some of these books feel, and that's how this series feels as a whole. But if you're a fan of Stephen King's craziness, and if you're a fan of like how he just writes what he wants to write and he just doesn't really give a shit what anyone else thinks, then you're going to love these. So I think that pretty much should hopefully answer, should you or should you not read this series? If it did answer it, let me know down in the comments below what you are going to do, whether or not you're going to pass on it or whether or not you are going to take your first journey to the Dark Tower, which, trust me, it's quite an incredible one. But you gotta prepare. You gotta prepare. It's gonna be a long journey, but it's gonna be fun. So let me know which way you decide to go with that. Let me know what you're currently reading. Let me know what I should read, and let me know what I should review or talk about next. I am currently reading The Name of the Wind right now, and I am loving it. Just so you guys all know, I just want to put that out there. I'm loving The Name of the Wind so far. I'm about like maybe a quarter of the way through, and it is fantastic. So I'm hoping to get a decent amount farther into it coming up in these next few days and weeks, and hopefully have that video out to you guys sooner than later. But if you enjoyed today's video, please drop a like, and if you want to see more like it, please subscribe. I'll be happy to talk about anything you guys want in the comments. Again, I'm not here to say that I'm right or wrong about any of this stuff. I have some crazy takes, but I'm not preaching gospel here. You guys can have all of your own opinions, and I would love to hear what those are down in the comments below. Hopefully we'll have another video for you guys soon. Please stay tuned for anything else coming down the pipeline. I would love to do a review of Invincible. I am almost thinking that I probably should read that again just to really, you know, give you guys like a full in-depth analysis for that, because it is one of my favorite series. So we might wait a little while on that, and I might read that again just to, you know, give you guys, like I said, that full comprehensive breakdown, because it is a fantastic series. But definitely probably next will be Name of the Wind. And if you guys have any writing videos that you would like me to release in terms of writing advice or talk about my own books or anything like that, please also let me know what you guys want to see down in the comments below. So that pretty much does it for Should You Read the Dark Tower series. I hope this helps, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy reading and writing, and I'll see you guys next time.